Okay, now I'm actually ready. So hello, welcome to the document accessibility presentation here. My name is Michael Hanscom. I'm our program manager for accessible technology. And broadly, my role here is to make sure that students can access all the information they need to, and faculty and staff can make that information available to everybody. The really brief elevator pitch is I make sure your jobs are safe because Highline is not getting sued under ADA regulations. And then also just on a personal level, I'm a science fiction geek and a Star Trek fan. If I wasn't using the little fancy background, you'd see an X-Files poster and some Star Trek ships on the back behind me on my desk. So if you ever run into me and just searching for something to say, anything geeky is usually a great conversation starter. So why are we talking about accessibility? There are all sorts of reasons. Not everybody discloses that they have a disability. We have disabled students and employees that you probably don't know about. Statistically, about 20% of Washington Community College students have disabilities, but only about 5% of them actually disclose, which means there are a lot of students out there who are in classes, who are on campus, who have disabilities that that they have not disclosed that we don't know about. So anytime that you're designing documents or anything with disabilities in mind, you're helping a lot more people than you might realize right off the bat. People don't need to be disabled to benefit. There are a lot of accessibility measures that benefit all sorts of people. One broad example is captions on videos. There are a lot of people who really appreciate having captions, whether they're just watching something in a noisy environment, if they're watching something at home and have kids running around, not always the quietest situation. They could be English language learners. Subtitles can be a great way to get a better idea of, mapping language to words and all that. All sorts of possibilities. If you're creating with accessibility in mind when you create documents, it saves time later if someone comes along and says, oh, hey, this would be a lot easier for me to access if this. If you've already planned for that ahead of time, then you're good to go already. And of course, it's a legal requirement. Both federal and Washington state requirements say that as a federal institution, as an educational institution, we need to make sure that that the materials we produce are accessible to everyone. So, like I said, I help make sure that we're not getting sued. This is an excerpt from the new faculty contract that just went into effect. What's shown here is not the full language. I've edited it down a little bit to show up on the slide. But basically, all faculty are, as part of the new agreement that was agreed to, and for any faculty who are around, thank you for that. These pieces say that all course syllabi must meet accessible requirements. And then all electronic content used in a course must meet federal accessibility requirements by the third quarter in which it's used. Unless, of course, a student has a letter of accommodation, in which case, it needs to be done immediately. But this is just making sure that Highline has said that, yes, this is important to us. Accessibility is something that matters for us and for all of our students. And we are going to make sure that that is something that we are all working towards, which is absolutely wonderful. So when looking at syllabi, Highline has has for a long time had an inclusive syllabus template, a basic starting point for our instructors to use. We've recently gone through and updated this so that it is an accessible inclusive syllabus template. We just did that, and for a faculty member, this is just the recommended starting point when creating new syllabi for classes. And a lot of it is just plug and play, pull out the boilerplate information, put in your own, and you're ready to go. There's a link to that in a number of places across the Highline website. The LTC site has it. The Academic Affairs site has a link to it. And of course, it is linked in this presentation if you download that. Now I'm going to start just kind of going over some broad accessibility tips that are applicable anytime you're working on documents. First thing is headings. When you're creating headings in a document, you want to make sure that you're actually using styles, and I'll show a little bit more about this in just a moment. But when you're creating a document, if to create a heading, if you're just saying, okay, well, I'm going to make that bold and I'm going to make it 18 point and there we go, Well, I mean, it looks good if for someone who's interacting with the document visually, but there's no indication within the document of the structure of the document, and someone using a screen reader isn't going to be able to tell the difference. So by using heading styles, not only do you get the formatting, but it also gives that structure information, embeds it into the document, and then screen reader users can access that information as they go through. It's very easy to check documents, whether they're existing documents or documents you're working on, to see if they have structure. In Word, there's a view menu. You just show the navigation pane. In Google Docs, it's the view menu and then show outline. And I'll show you briefly what this looks like. So in Word, again, here we have the view menu and then turn on the navigation pane. And then you get this section right here open on the left-hand side. And you can see this is always a little difficult to do when I'm going backwards, but you can see it's organized like a standard outline. The heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 2, heading 3, and so on down through the document. So at that point, you know that the document is using headings properly. The structure is built in. Google works very much the same way. I don't have the menu highlighted here, but again, it opens up the outline view on the side to show the structure. If you open these up and there's nothing here, then you know that, and even if a document looks like it has headers, you know that they're not actually there, and a screen reader isn't going to be able to access the same information that a sighted user does. So when you're using headings, there's in both this is a shot of Word's headings toolbar. The styles just sit at the top of the standard toolbar. One of the first things, and this seems a little weird, but they're very nice at providing a title style. Just ignore that and pretend it doesn't exist. There are technical reasons why that is that I could get into if anybody was really curious. But it does get kind of geeky. So basically what it boils down to is just ignore the title style. Every document should have a single heading 1 as the title of the document, and that heading 1 should only be used a single time because screen readers look for that heading 1 and say, okay, that's what this document is. And then as you go through the rest of the document, other heading levels just cascade down from there and can be used as many times or multiple times as necessary. So as in an earlier example, there was a heading 2, then a couple of heading 3s, then back up to a heading 2, and so on. You do want to make sure that you don't skip levels from a heading 2 and then jump directly to a heading 4. You want to make sure you cascade through all of them in the correct order. And for those, and if you do want your documents to look different than the defaults that Word gives you, you can redefine how those headings are formatted. So just because you're using the styles that are presented here, you don't have to use them exactly as they look. You can reformat those styles and save that while still retaining the structure of the document. When you're making lists, a lot of times it's very common to just go through and use a little dash or the asterisk character to start your lists. And while Word and Google Docs are both pretty good about watching for that and automatically turning into a list, you want to make sure that you're either either it is turning into a list or you're actually using the list options to build your lists as you go along. And again, that's because screen readers can access this information. With headings, a screen reader user can go through and say, okay, just tell me about the headings, and they can step through a document that way. With lists, the screen reader will announce to the user, entering a list, there are 7 items on this list. The first item is this, the second item is this, and it'll step them. They're able to get the context for the list that way. Or if it's just a dash and then some text, or a star and then some text, they're not going to get that same contextual information. So you want to make sure to use the list options as you're building lists in your documents. Oh, and I'm going to say, I should have said this earlier, but at any point in here, if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put a message up in the chat, and keeping an eye on that on the side here. If anything is confusing or I skip over anything, feel free to toss questions out and I can bounce over to those at any point. Going on, tables. it is often very tempting to use tables for layout because it makes it really easy to put, okay, there's a little information over here and there's a little information in here, and it's very nice and organized. Unfortunately, that does not work very well with screen readers. It's just kind of a mess to try and deal with. So tables should really only be used for data and not laying out a document. You should use the program's native layout controls if you want to split into columns or anything along those lines. You should avoid merging or splitting cells, and you should make sure to define a header row. And here I'm in Word, my hand's going to disappear here, but in the table design toolbar, there is an option to turn on a header row and make sure that that tables have headers. And that, again, a lot of this comes down to how documents interact with screen readers. That allows the user, when they're going into a table, it will say, this table is about this. Here's the header. So column 1 is about this, like column 1, first name, column 2, last name, and so on as it's working through a column. If it doesn't have the header information, then it says column 1 and it reads information, column 2 and it reads information, but you don't have the context that's being given that the header row includes. And then backing up a little bit, one of the reasons not to use a table for layout is as screen readers go into tables, as I was just saying, they say like table 1, cell 1, and then they read out the data. Table, column 1, row 1, cell data, and then they'll read something out. Cell 2, they'll read that out. When you're using a table for layout, you end up getting all that extra information in. So even though a sighted user may just see, okay, there's text on the left-hand side and there's an image on the right-hand side, a screen reader user is going to hear something like table, row 1, cell 1, and then there's going to be all that information. Row 1, cell 2, image, whatever the image is. And it inserts a lot of extraneous and in that sort of situation, confusing information instead of just being, okay, here's the data in the table. So that's a little bit of the background into why you want to do things that way. Links. When you're putting links into documents, and starting with documents that are being presented electronically or going to be distributed electronically, links should be hyperlinked, and actual text, standard words, standard conversational words, not bare URLs. So here, my first example, we have of what not to do. We have read these guidelines at this long string of text. Oh, okay. I see a couple. I'm going to back up to tables a little bit. So nested tables. Jennifer is asking, how does it handle nested tables? Nested tables can be, the most honest answer is with difficulty, and I don't really know. I'd have to play with that to give a better answer off the top of my head. But all the guidelines that I have read on tables is to keep things as simple as possible. Off the top of my head, I mean, if you can try, like closing your eyes and trying to imagine navigating through a table where you say like table 1, cell 1, and then it says again, okay, table 2. So I don't know, I'm making this up off the top of my head, but with difficulty, if you can avoid nested tables, I'd say do that. And with all of these things, accessibility is a goal, and things are rarely going to be 100%. So if there's a good reason, it's just how it needs to be. That's simply how it needs to be. Molly's asking, what if you want to have students fill in tables? Well, that's the kind of situation where a table is perfectly acceptable. And again, you would want to have those headers. So you would have some, like if they're filling it out, say their name and address, just as an example, you still want to have that header row in there. So, column 1, first name, column 2, second family name, column 3, address. But then if they're using the screen reader, they'll just get, it'll say something like column 1, first name, row 2, blank, and then they know that, okay, this is where I'm supposed to put in the information. So filling in tables is fine, because again, you're using tabular data in some way. Hopefully that made sense. So it's not about, don't use tables, it's just make sure you're using tables as tables and not as a way to force a document into looking a particular way. Okay, that makes sense. Wonderful, good. Okay, back to links. So again, in electronic documents, if you're sending an electronic document out and a link is unlinked, well, it doesn't do a whole lot of good. Best case scenario, someone would be able to select that, copy it, and then paste it into a browser. Linking like this is better, but again, with a screen reader, imagine reading that out loud. You'd have a screen reader saying, read the WCAG 2.1 guidelines at https://www, and that's where I stop, because this gets really annoying really quickly. And imagine having to sit and listen to that as you're going through a document. So what you want to do is link text, like in my final example here, read the WCAG 2.1 guidelines. Make sure the text is describing what is being linked to. And you want to do that rather than saying something like click here. Part of the reason behind that is another thing that screen readers allow users to do is to say, tell me all of the links on a page. It's just like a sighted user might take a look at a page, and it's really easy to skim through, look for the underlines and say, okay, here's a link to this, here's a link to this. Screen readers can do the same thing. But if it all says click here, then it will just say link, click here, link, click here, link, click here. And there is no contextual information given to the user about what any of those links actually are. Where if it says link, WCAG 2.1 guidelines, link, Highline College website, at that point, it gives them much more information and they know where they're going as they navigate from link to link to link. So avoid click here, avoid more info, avoid bare URLs that have to be read out. Just, tell people what they're linking to and link to it. Now, when you're talking about a printed document, it has slightly different things to think about. And sometimes one document will work just as well electronically or in print. But but sometimes you may want to consider if you might want to have two versions of a document, one that you're sending out electronically and one that's available for students to grab off a desk. In that case, if you do have a printed document, you want to make sure that URLs are short, readable, and easy to accurately type. In this case, like the accessible technology or the Access Services website here at Highline is fairly easy, access.highline.edu. Those same WCAG guidelines that I was using as an example in the last slide, that's not quite so easy. If someone's looking at that on a piece of paper, they're going to have to try and take that and type it all in and make sure they get it all capitalized correctly and all the dashes in the right place. That's not quite so easy to do. Possible, a little bit more possible here than in my next example, sharing a Google Drive folder. Anytime you have something like this, where it's this long string of random characters, that is basically, there's no real point in putting that into a printed document because so few people are going to take the time to look at the document, sit at their computer, type that all out to get where they want to go. Your best bet with printed URLs, if you don't have something nice and simple like Access Highline EDU, is to use a URL shortener, like bit.ly is a very common one, where you just put in a long URL like this, and it spits out, okay, here's 7 characters that are easily distinguishable. That is fairly easy to type in from a piece of paper. So just slightly different considerations, whether you're using, my brain just stopped, whether you're going for an electronic document or a physical document. Tony is asking about QR codes. I think QR codes can be very useful. Definitely useful in printed documents, not necessarily as useful in purely electronic documents, because at that point, I've seen people include QR codes in emails, but at that point, if someone's viewing an email on their phone and it says scan this QR code, that's kind of difficult to do if you don't have multiple devices to juggle. So it depends on the context. But again, there are times they're really useful. In this particular case, the very last slide of this presentation actually includes a QR code, so that if any of you who are watching this say, hey, I'd like to get that, I'd like to get a copy of that PowerPoint, and they had missed the times when I had done what I just did and put it in the chat, they can just use their phone, scan the QR code directly off of the Zoom screen, and they've got access to it that way. So So I think QR codes in the right can be very, very useful in quite a number of situations. You're welcome. Excellent. Okay. Moving on from there, alt text. Images that are included in documents should have alt text defined. And alt text is just a description of what the image has, or what the image is, or what's within the image. And there's a couple ways to think about this. And basically, what's the most important content? What do you want the reader, the viewer, to get from that image? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a long, flowery, absolutely precise description of everything that's in the image. Sometimes that's what you want. I could see an instructor for an art class who is creating documents. Well, if they're putting in an image of Monet, they might take them a little bit to do their best to describe that image in some way. But in other times you can just say, this is what it is. In the example I have here on the screen, this is actually the alt text of the image that is right there. I got a little recursive there, but it just says screenshot of PowerPoint's alt text entry pane. This text has been entered into the alt text entry field. So just enough to let people know this is what the image is. Decorative images should be marked as decorative, or just leave the alt text field blank. Now you can see here in the screenshot from PowerPoint, there's a little checkbox for mark as decorative. That's the easiest way to mark images as decorative in Word or PowerPoint. Not every program has that option. So if it's to a truly decorative image, you can just leave that blank and the screen reader will skip over it. The trick is realizing that if you do leave it blank and the screen reader skips over it, that's why you want to have alt text information for other images. Otherwise, screen reader users won't know the images are there. And if it's an important image, that could be a problem. So alt text for images. White space. When you're working with a multi-page document and you want to get information onto the next page, while it's really easy and tempting, please don't just put a whole lot of returns in. Screen readers will often read out line by line, and they might end up saying just blank, 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 blank. Gets pretty annoying pretty quickly. Use the page break function, or use the line and paragraph spacing options in either Word or Google Docs or whatever program you're using to increase the space as necessary to push things onto other pages. And it's again, much easier on the end user than having just a whole lot of blank lines at the end of a document or at the end of a page to work their way through. Contrast. For a lot of documents, you might not need to worry about this. If you're just typing stuff out, you've got black text on white, you're good to go. But if you start playing with colors, you want to make sure that there is enough contrast between the text and the background to be easily readable. One of the things that amused me when I started putting presentations together for Highline is this bright green that is used in the Highline logo. It's a very nice bright green, but if it's used against a white background, it's very difficult to read. There's not enough contrast there. So in all the presentations I'm making, I'm actually tweaking the green a little bit. It's a little bit darker. It's not technically the Highline green, but it's close enough, and it's actually visible. There's a link here in the PowerPoint, or you can just Google for the Web Aim Contrast Checker. It's a very easy way to just use a little eyedropper to pick out your foreground color, pick out your background color, and get a readout. Did my hand going the right way? Get a readout of going whether that passes or fails the contrast check to make sure that it's easily visible and easy to read. So that's just a quick run through of the most common basic accessibility concepts to keep in mind as you're creating documents. Once you have a document created, you want to make sure that you're taking a moment to check it and make sure that you're good to go. Word, under the Review tab, has a built-in accessibility checker, as does Google Docs. We'll get to that in just a moment, as does Adobe Acrobat. Most PowerPoint has an accessibility checker. Most of the commonly used applications have accessibility checkers built in. So with Words, it's under the Review tab and the Check Accessibility button. How accurate is accessibility meter on Canvas? I will actually get to that. If you'll give me just a moment, I'll get to Canvas in just a few slides. The technical quick answer to your question is that depends, but I'll get into more detail in just a couple of moments. So when you open Word's Accessibility Checker, it opens a panel on the right-hand side of the screen, and it'll go through the document and highlight any accessibility errors that it's finding and give some recommendations on how to correct them. In this particular example, I had an image that did not have any alt text. So over there, it's saying recommended actions, add a description. I click that, it pops open the alt text field where I can add a description, and then it moves on to the next one. It's a really easy way to just step through the document and find some of the most common errors. Same thing is available in Google Docs. With Google Docs, it's not built in directly, but Highline subscribes to an extension called Grackle Docs. Because in this case, it's in the extensions menu, go down to Grackle Docs and then launch. And in that case, again, it opens up a pane on the right-hand side, does the same basic thing as Word's Accessibility Checker, steps through. And again, I had that image without any alt text. And so it's telling me, oh, here's some alt text you need to add. Something to keep in mind, especially if you're moving back and forth between Word and Google Docs, is that no two accessibility checkers are exactly alike. They don't always look for exactly the same stuff. You may see things that Grackle Docs picks up on that Word's Accessibility Checker does not. Basically, do your best to get things as accessible as possible. As long as the major stuff is taken care of, you'll be in good shape, and better shape than many, many people. In Acrobat also, when you're dealing with PDFs, whether they're PDFs that you've created or PDFs that you've gotten from somewhere else, Acrobat has an accessibility checker. Again, it's in the right-hand pane. There's a little purple accessibility icon. If you have Acrobat and you don't see the purple accessibility icon, Acrobat has a Tools tab, and you should find it and be able to install it from within the Tools tab. But you start the accessibility check, and Acrobat will go through and present, again, just like the others, present a list of accessibility issues to be checked. With Acrobat, no document will be 100% accessible when you first check it. And part of that is because there are certain features that Acrobat says should be checked, but it cannot check automatically. It has to have a human looking at something and saying, okay, yes, that passes. So there will always be at least 2 errors with any accessibility check in Acrobat, and that's fine. They're easy to check. But some documents may have errors that cannot be easily fixed within Acrobat, and we just do the best we can. PDFs can be kind of difficult in this regard. Which brings me to my next point, is when you're creating documents, a lot of us are in the habit of just, okay, we'll create a document, we'll save it as a PDF, and then the PDF is what we send out. But then the question is, does it really have to be a PDF? PDFs often have accessibility issues that make them more difficult for disabled readers to access. And so we want to think about, is it really necessary? A lot of times we may think that, okay, I've created this document and it is the pinnacle of layout. I don't want anyone to change anything about it. This is exactly how I want it to look. Or maybe it's just we're concerned that we want the information in that document to be absolutely accurate and don't want anybody to change it down the line after the fact. Well, in each of those situations, I mean, it's kind of situationally dependent, but how important are each of those really? As far as the layout goes, yes, well, it's very, very nice to have a perfectly laid out document with all your page breaks in just the right places and all the images sitting exactly where you like them. If you distribute or give someone a Word document instead, that gives them a lot more agency in making sure that they can interact with and access that document in the best way for them. They can change the font size if larger fonts work better. They can change the font itself if one kind of font is easier for them to read. They can even change the colors. For some people, blue text on a yellow background is much more readable than black on white. Or maybe they just want to invert to white on black. But giving them that agency gives them the power to make sure that they can access the document in the best way that's possible for them. Even if it's not exactly the way you designed it, as long as they're getting the information, that might be the most important part. As far as protecting documents, again, situationally dependent, but the example I use for instructors is if you're creating a syllabus or a test and sending it out as a Word document, and then a student is coming back and saying, well, mine doesn't match yours, who's going to win in that debate? You've made the original document, it's going to be, I assume, posted on a Canvas page. You can easily say, well, I'm sorry, something went wrong. I'm not sure what happened, but here's the original. This is how it should be. And really, if they're trying to change the document afterwards and claim something, that's probably not an argument that they're likely to win in the long run. So text in native documents, whether it's Word, Google Docs, or just as a web page, like a Canvas page, it's simpler, it's more immediately accessible, and it gives the user that agency to make sure that they can access in the way that works best for them. But if it does need to be a PDF, and there are situations like that, it's best if you run the accessibility in your master document, run the accessibility check in your master document first, and then create the PDF from there, get it as accessible as possible first. In Office, you want to use File and then the Save as Adobe PDF option. Both on under Windows and on the Mac, there are very simple print to PDF options. They're convenient, but they are really bad for accessibility because print to PDF, it assumes that it's going through the print process. And all it has to do is basically send the pixels to a printer. So it doesn't include all the extra information that's needed for true accessibility. So you'll get a nice looking PDF, but it'll be an inaccessible PDF. So in Office, you want to make sure to use the Save as a PDF option. Google Docs, unfortunately, while it does allow you to download a PDF, in my experiments, I've found them to be not accessible. For some reason, the accessibility information is stripped out when they generate the PDF. It's possible they're using something like print to PDF in the background to do that. So what I recommend if you're generating a PDF from Google Docs is first download it as a Microsoft Word, or if you're in Google Slides as a PowerPoint document, run the accessibility checker, and then use the Save as PDF option. Just downloading a PDF from Google Docs unfortunately does not work very well. You need to take those couple extra steps. Now getting into Canvas. I told you I'd come back to that, Molly. Canvas has a couple different accessibility checkers built in. So the default one built into the Canvas editor is the little accessibility icon that is underneath the main editing window. As you build pages within Canvas, it's continually scanning, and you'll see it pop up little notification icons if it sees things that need to be improved. Just click on that, click on the little indicator, and it'll open up a pane to say, okay, here are the issues I found. Here's what needs to be fixed. In addition to that, Highline subscribes to something called the Ally Accessibility Checker, and that's the little meter, the green, yellow, red speedometer or gas gauge, however you want to describe it. Those scores are visible as you edit pages. And then, so you've got that little meter as you're editing a page, but then there's also a course accessibility report that lets you look at the your entire Canvas course and get a score for the whole thing and drill down to individual items that need to be fixed page by page. So Ally's accessibility meter is the one over at the top right of the Canvas page editing area. And then again, as it finds things, you can just click on that meter and it'll let you know what needs to be fixed and step you through fixing it. As far as how accurate it is, I'm not sure how best to answer that. It does it's accurate enough that when we get to a point where we start reviewing courses for accessibility, that's going to be one of our major indicators, is how good is the Ally score. It catches the majority of the common page editing things, like making sure your headings are in the right orders, making sure there's alt text, all of that. It also goes out and it looks at PDFs to make sure the PDFs have at least a minimal level of accessibility if you've loaded PDFs into your Canvas shell. I believe it also looks at if you've included videos, Panopto or YouTube videos. It also checks those to make sure that they have captions enabled. So it actually does a fairly good job. As I said earlier, no accessibility checker is likely to catch absolutely everything. We just do the best we can. But Ally is pretty robust in what it's able to catch. So again, and then going back to the course accessibility report, this is built in an Ally, and each Ally course, and it gives you an overview of the entire course accessibility. It reviews all of the pages within your Canvas course, and again, as I was just talking about, many types of attached or linked documents and videos for accessibility errors. And then it'll give you a list of the types of errors and link out to allow you to correct them. And so here's an example of a test course that I've built. The Ally Course Accessibility Report is down towards the bottom of your sidebar here. Click on that, it'll bring this up. And my test course, 87%, that's not bad. It could definitely be improved. It'll go through, showing you the different areas and what can be fixed. Content with the easiest issues to fix, and then low scoring content. So you can either start by going through and attacking the stuff that's going to be quick, or you can say, okay, this is the stuff that I really need to take care of and start digging into that. As you scroll further down this page, it will show you all these different things. Okay, here are the different issues I found. Like this image does not have a description. I found that 4 times. And you can click on that, and it'll show you each of the images that don't have a description. So you can go in and add descriptions as necessary. Here I have heading structure that does not start at the right level. Heading structure within Canvas should start at 2. Because the Canvas automatically does the heading level 1 for the page title. So when you're building within the page builder, it's all going to start at 2 and go on from there. It appears at some point I start at level 3 or 4 or somewhere along there. So there is something that needs to be fixed. And then it'll just go through, here's a document with contrast issues. This document is untagged. So there's a PDF document that isn't tagged for accessibility, so that should be fixed. And it'll just let you step through the entire course. Find the pieces that need to be fixed and work on getting them fixed. And of course, as you're working on that, that's part of what I'm here for, is to help. So if you get stuck or run into problems or just say this doesn't make any sense, how do I fix this? I will do my best to help, and I'll either be able to say, oh, that's easy, this is all you need to do, or I'll say, that's an excellent question, I need to do some research. And I'll figure out what the situation is and how to fix it. And that's what I have as far as the presentation is. Still 20 minutes left. So the Ally Course Accessibility Score, is there a goal percentage? We're narrowing down what, I could be a little silly and say the goal is always 100%, but that's not always easy to do, or may not even be doable in some cases, depending on the particular PDFs you're working with, or how old they are, where they came from, etc. We'd like to see, definitely green 90% or above. We'd like. Hopefully, most courses will be able to hit that. If you have a course that's not hitting that high and you're just struggling, or there are problem areas that are an issue, just get a hold of us, and we'll either be able to help, or we'll be able to say, well, sometimes that's all you can do. But hopefully, I'd aim for 90% or above. I think most courses should be able to hit that. Okay, thumbs up on that. Excellent. 94%. Excellent. Good job, Molly. So yes, so to wrap things up, if there are any other questions, feel free to pop your mic on and say things out loud, or just pop them into the chat. If anybody who has something you'd like me to look at and is brave enough to toss it up on screen or email it my way, we're happy to take a look at things here. Again, there's a pretty little QR code, so you can, or the bit.ly link, or I'll put that back in the chat once more. So you can download that, and eventually I will have this presentation recording also available in that same location after I've gone through and tweaked the captions to make sure that those are all ready to go. And is there anything else for right now? Are there any questions? Anything else I can